The PlayStation 1 era was a unique time for gaming. Of course you had the critically acclaimed 10 out of 10s, but there was a sense of creativity that just isn't seen anymore in mainstream gaming. Now, was creativity a gamble? Of course it was. You could either end up with the flop of a game that everyone remembers down the line as that one piece of hot ass, or you could make something fairly unique that would be later known as one of the pioneers of its respective genre. Obviously, you don't have to end up at either extreme camp of A, absolute dog shit, or B, the missing key in evolution. You can be a bit of both sometimes, and that is exactly what we will be talking about today. A game that has some dog shit elements in it, and some good in it. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Soul of the Samurai. Soul of the Samurai, also known as Ronin Blade in Europe, was a hack and slash Konami published back in 1999 for the PlayStation. Soul of the Samurai is one of those games of the PS1 era that was sort of its own thing. It's a game very much from that time, in good ways and bad. The best way I can put it is, imagine if Resident Evil and Tenchu had a child. That would be this game. The only heads up I can give you before we dissect this game is that if you plan on playing this for the first time like I did in the year 2024, and then coming back to this video later, don't expect anything crazy from it. Alright, so I'm gonna get the good out of the way first before I start roasting.
Hell no, man.
Music. It's nice. I do feel like the soundtrack is a bit small, as there are a lot of songs that get repeated. However, the music has this funky groovy vibe to it. You would think that it doesn't go well with the plot or the vibe of the village being overrun by monsters, but it works very well. Especially this info dump song. This shit is a banger. Listen to that bass line. The length. Longer game doesn't necessarily mean better game, and this game doesn't overwelcome its stay. Even for completionists, this game isn't that long. Bad dialogue. Now obviously this isn't good on an objective level, but I found this shit hilarious. This was my genuine reaction to this line. So much for my lack of interest in... What? What? Huh? Yep, and that's where the gravy train ends. On to the criticism. The gameplay is a mixed bag to say the least. I want to preface by saying I had fun with this game. Really, I do think this game is fun. I had a fun time. But I don't think on an objective critical level it's good. And there is a difference. It's like OG Resident Evil, right? Fixed cameras, pre-rendered backgrounds, going into the menu to equip items and check items, even tank controls. Except it's all poorly implemented. I mean, just look at this. What is this bullshit? Dude, I had to search up a guide to figure this shit out. It would be different if this was like a one-off bad angle, but exits and entire areas being hidden in these weird nooks and crannies is a constant problem throughout the game. The only real solution to this problem, excluding a walkthrough, is constantly opening up your map, because when you open up your map, there's like this little square thing, and on that square, there's a little line that indicates an area that you can go to. This isn't ideal though. It's not like OG Resi, where you have to access your pause menu / inventory for something useful or meaningful. This is the complete opposite, being overly tedious and simply putting it, something you shouldn't have to do. I'd understand maybe a secret area being tucked away from the player's eyes, but key locations that you have to access? Come on now. Bad camera work aside, the game is essentially a primitive hack and slash. You have two characters to play as, Kotaro and Lin. Kotaro is a samurai, and generally uses these heavy powerful swords, with no focus on projectiles such as kunais or bombs. He's also a grown-ass man, hence his movement is a lot more heavy and trotting. You feel like there's some power in his step. But his attacks are much slower because of it, and timing your attacks actually matters while playing as him. Lin is a ninja, therefore her entire moveset and how she feels as a playable character is more jumpy and quick, with her attack pattern being a furious hail of fists, legs, and blade. The game was always at this weird split when it comes to the overall product. For example, I really think Kotaro's side of the game shines when it comes to the gameplay. He is the samurai in Soul of the Samurai. However, the story gets his justice from Lin's part, but more on the story later. Before we delve into that, I'd like to briefly mention the combat loop of Soul of the Samurai. Soul of the Samurai has this sort of Onimusha style combat, with you as the player being able to lock onto the enemies and waiting for the perfect opening strike. You know that feature in Ghost of Tsushima where you can honorably duel the Mongols and you have this like draw battle? Think that, but that's the entire game. If you get a perfect timing, You can parry your enemy, causing this flashy kill animation that will instantly end them. Outside of that, it'll just be a bunch of mashing square to kill your enemies and move on. You also have these special attacks that require MP, which will do great damage combined with the cool little animation. To restore your MP, you must simply kill more enemies. Items consist of a balance of healing and offensive items, but take note, as previously mentioned, the offensive items are exclusive to Lyn. Alright, with all that being said, maybe this was a blunder on my end, right? Maybe this was my mistake. But when I read and saw Soul of the Samurai, what I thought I'd be getting was a samurai-style action game. However, the actual samurai-ness in the game is far and few in between. To best demonstrate what I mean, I'll be using the bosses as an example. To begin, scratch out Lyn entirely because her combat style is ninja-based, hence you're just not meant to get the samurai experience with her. This is where Kotaro shines, but outside of very few exceptions, we never really get to dive deep into the parries, into the slashing of the sword, the samurai-ness of it all, and it just leaves you very disappointed. The enemies I've chosen to ignore entirely because you learn their timing after like an hour of playing, and then it's just spamming square a bunch. The majority of the bosses follow the same path. Are they cool in design? Sure, even though the wizard guy kicked my ass. I think he was a cool boss in concept, but it just wasn't what I came for. I came for the samurai duels, the one-on-one life or death battles. You wanna know how many times these types of battles in a game called Soul of the Samurai take place? Take a wild guess. Twice. 2 times. And one of those 2 times is an optional boss, of which you really have to go out of your way to get to, meaning most players are probably never going to interact with him. We're going to discuss the story in a few seconds, but just to end on this one point. Some could argue that the reason the bosses are the way they are is due to the plot device of soul bugs infecting them. The priest guy being a giant, the flying wizard, Tojo. You can't really have a high-stake honorable sword fight with a tapeworm monster, right? I would agree if the one mainline sword duel that we do have, Kotaro's childhood friend, Mr. Receding Hairline, wasn't infected by the soul bugs. But he is. Yo, why couldn't we just have more of this? Other swordsmen that have been powered up by the soul bugs, but they're still fucking swordsmen at the end of the day. I'm not sure what the reason was. I don't know if it was laziness, a lack of foresight, or if this was the intended output. But the game that has samurai in it just doesn't have these samurai-like features. At least enough of them. Alright, I'm spoiling everything, so back off and skip to this timestamp if you haven't played this 25-year-old game yet. Okay, so we have these 2 characters. Kind of like a RE2 scenario thing here, with our protagonist Kotaro and Lyn. Each character has their own specific backstory, and reasons why they come to this village. But in hindsight, all that stuff is pretty insignificant when the main overarching plot of the soul bugs kicks in. For example, Kotaro is someone who was once a local of this village, leaving many years ago, and now randomly comes back to visit his friend and his parents' grave. Why or how? Not a clue. It's never focused on ever again. And speaking on the soul bugs, you'd think with damn near every enemy and boss being infected by them, and how seemingly important they are to the story, that you'd get more of an explanation or lore on what these things are. Nope, they were found in this random cave being taken care of by this random old wizard. Now I should preface that by far, Lyn's story is 10 times better than Kotaro's. In fact, overall, Lyn's narrative is much more polished and at least sort of plausible when compared to Kotaro. It's also worth noting that Lyn's scenario is the one that contains the true ending to the game. Is it weak and poorly executed? Most definitely. But I'll take the somewhat makes sense plot of a ninja being sent by the shogunate to stop a possible revolt over, hey, I just randomly decided to show up at home. With that being said, I really do wish the world building as a whole was more sturdy and built upon. The story is very basic, but not basic in a, wow, despite having a fairly simple narrative, this game makes me think and reflect upon topics X, Y, and Z. Basic as in who wrote this crap. For example, Oda is meant to be the secret true big bad, trumping even Lord Tojo. But why, dude? He has no motivation to be doing this besides being an over-the-top cartoonish villain. Take Lady Kagami from Tenchu 2. She serves a similar role to Oda, being the mastermind antagonist, being fairly in the background until the final showdown. I'm not saying the Tenchu 2 villain cast is a complete masterpiece, trust me I know.
Defeated by barbarian dog.
but at least you know why Kagami is doing all of this. She envisions building a world where ninja are at the top of the food chain, not having to murder and essentially be pawns for warlords and samurai. You see how even though the protagonist doesn't agree with the antagonist, you can at the very least respect and understand the motivations of the villain? This is completely absent from Oda's character. I mean, for fuck's sake, the guy wears pentagrams on his gloves. Make him some crazy cultist that's doing this for a sacrifice. Anything honestly, then I'm gonna take over the world because wahaha. This really sucks because underneath all the bullshit, I see a very unique and interesting plot. I really do. But the execution leaves a lot to be desired. Am I probably overanalyzing what was meant to be a kid's game from the 90s? 100%. I just can't help but see the holes in the narrative. Again, despite what it seems like, I had fun playing this game. If you're looking for something to play for a few hours over a weekend, this is it. With that being said, this was a fairly innovative game that had a lot of potential that just wasn't seen through.